Morning television isn't supposed to feel like a battlefield. It's designed to be light, cheerful, and safe, a place where viewers sip their coffee while listening to celebrity charm, soft questions, and easy laughter. Hosts smile, jokes land, and awkward moments are quickly brushed away under the glow of studio lights. But on one particular morning, that familiar formula broke apart. When walked onto the set of This Morning, sitting across from Hammond, and the energy in the studio shifted in an instant. What began as a routine segment quickly unraveled into one of the most combative and uncomfortable interviews the show had ever broadcast. From the very first moments, the clash of personalities was impossible to ignore. With her trademark warmth and booming laugh, tried to maintain the cozy tone that has made her beloved among viewers. Calm and measured, attempted to keep the conversation balanced, guiding it with his usual professionalism, but entered the studio with a different presence altogether. She was polished, composed, and every movement seemed carefully considered, as though she wasn't arriving for a lighthearted chat but stepping onto a stage where every word would be dissected. The tension was subtle at first, almost hidden beneath smiles and pleasantries, yet it was there, pressing in at the edges of the conversation, waiting to break through. It was supposed to be an ordinary interview. Instead, it became something far different, a cultural flashpoint where charm collided with confrontation, and where one of the most scrutinized women in the world refused to play by the rules of morning TV. The studio itself couldn't have looked more inviting. Bright colors splashed across the set, sunlight poured through the iconic windows, and the familiar hum of cameras and crew filled the air. Everything about This Morning screamed comfort, the kind of place where celebrity guests usually settle into the sofa and sink into playful conversation. Hammond leaned into that energy immediately. Her laugh, booming and infectious, carried across the room as she welcomed with open arms. It was the kind of greeting she gave almost everyone, warm, disarming, and impossible to resist. But's entrance wasn't like most guests. She stepped forward with precision, her posture tall, her smile practiced but tight. Instead of leaning into his embrace, extended her hand in a controlled, almost business-like gesture. The moment lasted only a second, but it was enough to shift the atmosphere. Its natural warmth seemed to bounce off a wall of calculation. Ever the professional, smoothed over the moment with a quick introduction, but the air in the studio had already changed. Behind the glossy set design and cheerful tone, there was now an unmistakable crack in the illusion. So Rival wasn't just another celebrity drop-in. It was an entrance that carried the weight of years of headlines, controversies, and public scrutiny. And for the audience watching at home, that first exchange signaled that this would not be the easygoing segment they expected. Something sharper, heavier, and far more unpredictable had just entered the room. The tension revealed itself in the smallest of gestures. Being moved in for the kind of hug that has made her a fan favorite, warm, genuine, and overflowing with personality. It's the kind of embrace that instantly lowers walls, reminding guests and audiences alike that this is just a friendly morning chat, not a courtroom. But didn't meet her halfway. Instead, she extended her hand, palm firm, fingers precise, her expression composed but unreadable. It was a handshake that spoke volumes. Polite, yes, respectful maybe, but it wasn't warm, and more importantly, it wasn't mutual. The air shifted immediately as though the studio lights had grown just a little harsher. Laughed it off with her signature sparkle, trying to brush past the awkwardness, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Quick on his feet, smoothed the moment with a charming remark, redirecting the attention back to his appearance on the show. Yet even with those quick recoveries, the audience at home had already felt it. That split-second clash of expectations, hug versus handshake, wasn't just about body language. It symbolized the entire dynamic that would unfold during the interview. Wasn't here to melt into the lighthearted rhythms of daytime television. She had come armored, ready to defend, ready to control. And from the very first touch, it was clear that this conversation would not follow the usual script. At first, everything sounded harmless enough. Leaned in with that easy charm he's known for, tossing a few gentle icebreakers, questions about her life in California, her family, the weather, the kind of things that normally float across morning television like background music. Answered politely, her words smooth, her tone calm. But beneath the surface, there was a sharpness, a careful edge that didn't go unnoticed. She wasn't just chatting, she was calculating. Each response felt weighed, measured, rehearsed. When asked about her new projects, offered a polished, but avoided giving too much away. When complimented her style, smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't linger, practiced, almost transactional. The warmth that usually carries these small exchanges simply wasn't there. Viewers watching from home could sense it. The atmosphere wasn't playful, and the easy flow that usually masters so effortlessly just wasn't landing. Instead, there was a subtle tension, a stiffness in the air that hinted at what was to come. It was clear that hadn't arrived for a breezy morning chat, she was here with her guard up. And that guard would only grow stronger once the questions shifted away from surface-level small talk. The small talk had barely settled when made a choice that changed the tone of the entire interview. His voice was steady, his words polite, but the question landed with weight. He asked about her ongoing rift with the royal family, not in a tabloid way, not aggressively, but directly enough that there was no mistaking it. This wasn't fluff anymore. For a split second, composure faltered. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, her lips pressed into a firmer line, and then came the answer. She didn't dodge, not exactly, but she reframed. She spoke of misunderstandings, of stories that were never fully told, painting herself once again as the misunderstood outsider. It was careful, deliberate, and yet undeniably defensive. Tried to soften the moment with a quick follow-up about charity work, but the shift had already happened. The atmosphere was no longer lighthearted. The mask of casual conversation had cracked, and what peeked through was something heavier and far less predictable. The interview had stepped into dangerous territory and knew it. Ever the peacemaker jumped in with her trademark warmth. She leaned forward, her voice brighter, almost pleading with the atmosphere to lighten up again. She asked about her children, about life in California, about the little things that usually bring a guest back into comfortable territory. It was classic, using humor, kindness, and her own infectious laugh as a shield against the growing tension. But didn't follow her lead. Her answers were short, precise, and carefully packaged. There was no playful back and forth, no shared moment of laughter. If anything's guarded tone made warmth feel almost out of place, like a flame flickering in a room slowly filling with cold air. Still tried, she cracked a small joke, the kind that usually gets her audience howling. A few in the studio chuckled but didn't even flinch. That silence hung heavy, leaving in the awkward position of smiling through it while desperately steering the conversation away from open conflict. But the truth was clear, the balance had shifted. The easy charm of morning television was slipping through fingers and was tightening her grip on the narrative. If was the cushion, was the spark. He wasn't willing to let the interview slide back into safe territory, not when the audience was leaning forward waiting for more. With a measured calm, he pressed again, this time about the public's perception of her. He asked whether she ever reflected on the criticism, whether she believed any of it was fair. The question cut sharper than the ones before. His posture stiffened, her jaw tightened, and she paused just long enough to show that the words had landed. Then she responded, her voice cool but firm. She dismissed much of the criticism as media spin, painting herself once again as the target of relentless campaigns designed to twist her every move. She didn't concede an inch. Nodded politely, but he didn't back down. He pressed again, asking if she had any regrets, not just about how she was treated, but about how she handled things herself. That was the moment her composure flickered. For a split second, her eyes hardened and the smile she had carefully maintained vanished. The audience could sense it, wasn't just defending anymore, she was fighting. This was no longer small talk. It was confrontation, and had just cracked the veneer that had worked so hard to keep in place. While the studio tried to keep its balance, living rooms across the country were buzzing. Viewers weren't sipping their morning coffee with a smile, they were leaning in, texting friends, and jumping onto social media to share their shock. Clips of the awkward hug, the clipped responses, and pointed questions were already spreading before the interview had even wrapped. For many, it was uncomfortable to watch. His guarded answers clashed so sharply with warmth that the tension almost radiated through the screen. Others, however, were glued to it for exactly that reason. This wasn't the polished, soft-focused television they expected. It was raw, messy, and unpredictable. Comment threads lit up with divided takes. Some defended, saying she was just protecting herself from unfair attacks. Others accused her of arrogance, claiming she couldn't even manage basic friendliness on live TV. The split was instant, and it mirrored the exact divisions that had defined her public image from the very beginning. What became clear was that this interview wasn't going to disappear quietly into the morning lineup. It was already turning into a cultural flashpoint, and could feel that weight building in real time right there on the sofa. Every interview has a moment when the tension either dissolves or detonates. On that morning sofa, it detonated. Unwilling to let the conversation drift back into safety, asked directly about the ongoing estrangement with her father. His words were careful, but there was no escaping the sting. It was a question she had spent years dodging, one that cut straight to the heart of her most personal controversies. Froze for a fraction of a second. Her smile disappeared, her body leaned back ever so slightly, and her eyes sharpened. Then she spoke. Her answer wasn't explosive, but it was cold, calculated, and heavy with finality. She framed herself once again as the misunderstood victim, carefully avoiding details but making it clear she would not be painted as the villain. The studio air turned electric, glanced nervously towards, sensing that they had crossed a line. The crew behind the cameras shifted uncomfortably. And the viewers at home, they could feel it too. This wasn't just awkward television anymore. It was confrontation laid bare, the kind of moment that etches itself into public memory. From that point forward, the interview could no longer be rescued. The breaking point had been reached, and everything after would only deepen the divide. Sensing the danger, did what she always does best. She tried to pull the moment back from the edge. With a bright smile that almost seemed to tremble at the corners, she shifted the conversation towards philanthropic work, asking about her projects with children and her vision for the future. It was the kind of lifeline that usually resets an interview, reminding both guest and audience of something positive. But this time it didn't land. Gave polished, almost scripted answers about empowerment and creating change, her voice steady but stripped of warmth. Laughed at her own small jokes, but the sound felt forced, desperate even, as if she knew the interview was slipping beyond her control. She leaned in closer, nodding enthusiastically, but responses were measured, cold, and increasingly defensive. The contrast was painful to watch. Was pouring everything into salvaging the tone, charm, humor, empathy while stood her ground, armored and unyielding. Instead of dissolving the tension, the attempt only highlighted the divide. The harder pushed for lightness, the heavier the air seemed to grow. By this point, viewers weren't just watching an interview. They were watching a struggle, one woman trying to keep the show afloat, and another determined to keep her guard up at all costs. Wasn't finished. While tried to smooth the cracks with charm, he leaned back in his chair and delivered another strike. This time, his question cut closer to his public image. Did she believe that her own actions had contributed to the controversies that surrounded her? It was bold, direct, and impossible to dodge without raising eyebrows. The studio seemed to freeze as absorbed the words. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she answered, her tone calm but brimming with a quiet fire. She insisted that much of the narrative around her life had been twisted, that her actions had been taken out of context, and that the real story had never been fairly told. Listened, nodding, but he didn't flinch. His silence after her response spoke volumes. It was the silence of a man inviting her to say more, to dig deeper, or perhaps to stumble. Realizing the trap, clamped down even harder. Her words became clipped, her smile gone, her eyes fixed firmly on her interviewer. The exchange was electric. Nervous laughter filled the gaps, but it couldn't disguise the reality, was holding to account and was fighting to maintain control. For viewers, it wasn't just television anymore, it was a battle of wills playing out live. By now, the energy inside the studio had changed completely. What began as lighthearted morning chatter had hardened into something far heavier. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to hover between every question and answer. Even the crew behind the cameras appeared tense, their movements slower, their eyes darting nervously between the hosts and warmth no longer lit up the room the way it usually did. Her laughter sounded thinner, her attempts at jokes landed with little response, and the pressure was etched across her face. Though calm, carried an edge in his tone, and everyone could feel it. This was no longer a friendly chat, it was a standoff being fought with words, smiles, and long silences. And she sat tall, her posture immaculate, her face a mask of control. But control can only hide so much. Every clipped answer, every measured pause betrayed the reality that she was on the defensive. The audience watching at home felt it too. The studio, once a stage for comfort and charm, had transformed into an arena of confrontation. What no one could deny anymore was that this interview wasn't just going off script. It was spiraling into uncharted territory. Even before the segment ended, the reaction was spilling far beyond the walls of the studio. Viewers at home, phones in hand, began flooding social media with clips, comments, and outrage. Hashtags like On This Morning, V's, and Morning Show Meltdown were already climbing the trending charts within minutes. Some praised sharpness, calling her a woman standing firm against an industry that constantly tried to tear her down. But just as many, if not more, were siding with. They saw in her outburst a rare moment of honesty on live television, a voice speaking for an audience tired of polished answers and self-importance. TikTok users clipped the cold handshake at the start of the interview, replaying it with captions like, "You knew it was over from this moment." Others shared fiery words, with the "you used it when it suited you" echoing across timelines, stitched into countless reaction videos. By the time the show wrapped, Twitter was ablaze. Memes flooded in, fan camps picked their sides, and journalists were already drafting headlines. The world wasn't just watching a morning show interview anymore. It was watching a cultural flashpoint in real time. If thought silence was her shield, the aftermath proved otherwise. Critics doubled down, accusing her of being manipulative, evasive, and incapable of handling tough conversations without resorting to vague answers or deflections. On social media, hashtags trended for hours, many of them mocking her carefully curated image of authenticity. The public reaction showed just how deep the divide runs. Her loyal supporters defended her as unfairly targeted, while skeptics saw every pause, every forced smile as evidence that the mask had slipped. Even seasoned media analysts weighed in, calling the interview one of the most damaging moments of her public career in years. What was meant to be an opportunity for a soft reset had instead spiraled into a cultural flashpoint, leaving more polarizing than ever. Morning television thrives on routine, friendly chatter, predictable laughs, and a promise that nothing too heavy will break the day. But this interview shattered that illusion. What began as harmless promotion ended as a clash of wills, exposing the cracks in her public image for millions to see in real time. For some, the moment confirmed their belief that she is unfairly hounded by the press and deserves compassion. For others, it was the final piece of evidence that isn't the polished heroine she portrays, but a master of control who bristles the moment the narrative slips from her hands. In the end, the This Morning showdown wasn't just another celebrity interview, it was a cultural moment, a test of authenticity in an age when every pause, every word, and every silence is dissected. And while the cameras may have stopped rolling, the questions it raised about her truth and her future linger on, demanding answers she may never be willing or able to give.